Welcome back, America. All week I'm doing a series with Senator Tom Cotton on his brand new book, 7 Things You Cannot Say About China. In the very first segment, we talked about the last chapter, China could win. The second chapter of the book is China is preparing for war. And it begins by recounting, Senator, China's been fighting wars continually since Mao won, not just against Taiwan, but against Korea, the Soviet Union, India, Vietnam. I know about these things, but I don't really string them together like the string of pearls that you did. It's a pattern.
Yeah, I think, in the first chapter, we talked yesterday about China is an evil empire. That's what Ronald Reagan said about communist Russia. We need to say the same thing about communist China because it helps explain not just their oppression at home, but their incredibly aggressive record abroad. As you said, and as I write in chapter 2 of 7 Things You Can't Say About China, China has a long, bloody history since the rise of communism in 1949. There's almost no country on its border that it hasn't invaded. Some multiple occasions. It supported communist insurgencies all around the world, from Asia to Africa, even Latin America. So we shouldn't be surprised to see China becoming much more aggressive today against Taiwan, for instance, as China's gone from having a relatively small and backwards military to having the world's second largest military, or largest military and second most technologically capable military.
You mentioned an army of 4 million, a standing army of 4 million, and then on page 48, a single Chinese shipyard can produce more vessels than all of America's shipyards combined. China has 13 shipyards. That's sort of stunning, Senator.
Yeah, it's both a sad testament to what we've done in America to allow our shipbuilding capacity to atrophy, but also just how deeply invested China is in this military buildup to ultimately try to exclude America entirely from Asia, to prevent us from defending our own interests there. And that's most notable, again, in its shipbuilding capacity. One shipyard, or a single Chinese shipyard, is more than all of our shipyards combined, and they got 13 of them. That's why their Navy is now larger than our Navy, just like their Army is more than twice the size of our Army. As I say in the book, their overall military forces are twice the size of our military, more than twice the size, actually. Again, they're not quite as technologically capable, but they've closed the gap rapidly, and it's getting closer each year.
Now, you also write, today the People's Liberation Army has the world's third largest and second most advanced Air Force. Can they go toe-to-toe with our F-22s and F-35s or the Super Hornets?
Unfortunately, I think they probably could. In some cases, the radars they have on their fighters are as effective as our radars. And maybe most worrisome, the air-to-air missiles they have can outrange our air-to-air missiles. So Chinese pilots might see our pilots at the same time or even earlier, but they'd be able to strike them before we can. And that's to say nothing of the air defenses that they've built all along their coast to try to push America out of the so-called first island chain, and also of the sensing technologies they have from radar or from space through satellite systems. So I've seen a lot of war games about a potential conflict between China and the United States, and I can just say that none of them have a happy ending for America or for the world.
2 more facts from Chapter 2 in 7 Things You Can't Say About China. A single Chinese company manufactures 70% of the world's drones, and they have doubled the number of their intelligence satellites in space in the last 4 years. It is now only second to us. Will they pass us in space with satellite numbers soon, Senator?
Yeah, I think they probably will. And again, it's all designed to keep America away from China's near abroad, especially keep it away from Taiwan. If Communist China decides to go for the jugular in Taiwan, those satellites are designed specifically to identify American ships and American aircraft, and anything that we might have that could threaten China's control over Taiwan if they decide to go for the jugular on Taiwan. It's just another example of the breathtaking military buildup over the last quarter century. Since 2000, China's military spending has grown by more than 1,200%. Again, we've really seen nothing like it in the world, certainly not in the modern world.
You know, there's more. I hate to say there's more. A square mile, for the benefit of the Steelers fans, a square mile, that's a mile on each side, is 640 acres. China has constructed 3,200 acres of new islands. That's a lot of military basing capability, yeah. Senator.
Yeah, and this is all available on open satellite imagery. You can see it over the years. This goes back to my early days in the Senate when Barack Obama basically took China at its word that it wouldn't militarize the islands it was building. Obviously, it broke that word. And what you used to have in the South China Sea were these small rocky outcroppings. Maybe at low tide, there'd be some rocks and scrubs available, but that was about it. And China, through dredging and building, has turned these into major naval and air bases. They have long runways for not just fighters, but heavy bombers, the most advanced radars. They have missile defenses and offensive strike missiles that could hit our Navy vessels going through the South China Sea. They have barracks. Some of them even have swimming pools for the soldiers that they plan to station there. That obviously pushes out the range of China's missiles and aircraft by several hundred miles from their mainland, but it also gives them the opportunity to perhaps control all traffic through the South China Sea, which is a critical seaway, not just for our Navy, but more than 1/3 of all global trade. And it all happened right under our watch.
Last statistic in this chapter, China is preparing for war. They went from almost no nuclear weapons to 500 today en route to 1,000. And the day is approaching, you write, where they will overmatch our arsenal.
Yeah, this is a big shift under Xi Jinping from China's traditional policy. They used to say they had so-called minimal deterrence, which is only enough nuclear weapons to prevent a nuclear adversary like the United States, like the old Soviet Union, from contemplating a first strike because they'd be able to strike back, to now building their own first strike capability by ground through missiles, by air from bombers, and by sea from submarines. When Xi took office a little over 10 years ago, they only had about 240 missiles. They've doubled that to 500. Our Pentagon thinks they'll double again by the end of this decade. By 2035, they'll be up to 1,500 warheads. That's an important number to note because almost how many we currently have under the so-called New START treaty with Russia, which is another example of how we've hamstrung our defenses against China. We have this nuclear arms control treaty with Russia going back to the Cold War era. We have several other arms control treaties. China has never been a part of any one of these treaties. They've never expressed any interest in being a part of them either. So we have tied our own hands behind our back as China approaches nuclear parity with us, and they may even pass us in the next decade. And if you combined their forces with their so-called all-weather friend, Russia, they actually have a nuclear overmatch against us right now.